Violetta stood at the window and silently looked at the thunderstorm. She realized that she had done everything in her power. She endured life in this terrible place for 3 whole years, and now the limit has come. Violetta poured a handful of pills into her palm and looked at them for a long time, a little more, and it would all be over. She put the pills in her mouth and washed it down with red wine, straight from the bottle. Violetta could no longer endure these ridicule. When the bottle was empty, Violetta felt very weak and dizzy. The bottle slipped out of her hands and broke. Having reached the bed with difficulty, Violetta lay down and closed her eyes. She had nothing more to regret in this life. Tears appeared in the girl's eyes. She didn't even have anyone to say goodbye to. No one would regret her leaving. She was thinking about how it had come to this. Violetta was born the only princess in the Lacronda family. Everyone constantly admired her. Anyone could envy her life, because she was pampered from childhood and was never denied anything. Violetta wondered if she had not married this man then. Could she still be happy? The girl stretched out her hand to the sun, playing with the rays. What's the point of thinking about it? Time cannot be turned back. 3 years earlier, the reforms in national politics that King Lacround had adopted failed miserably, and the king, unable to withstand a nervous breakdown, died. The flames of popular rebellion flared up every day, and eventually the rebels broke into the castle and captured the remaining members of the ruling family. Violetta, her brothers, and mother could not sleep peacefully. Each day that came was more alarming than the previous one. Soon the royal family was mired in debt and faced imminent death. At this moment, it became clear that Winter Blooming just needed a title. The reason for this was that he was the illegitimate child of the Duke of Blooming, born from a foreigner. Due to his unclean blood, the likelihood of inheriting the title of Duke was extremely small, but he had the talent to earn money. At that time in Lacronda, there were only 2 ways to obtain a particular title. The first of them is succession, when the title passed from fathers to sons, from sons to grandsons. The second way to get a title is through marriage. Although this option was slippery, it did take place. Based on his position, Winter had only the second option. He had to marry a girl from the royal family. Winter shelled out a fortune to pay off the royal family's debt. In exchange for this, he asked for only one thing: marriage with Princess Violetta. The poor mother had no choice but to make concessions and fulfill this condition of Winter. They did not postpone the wedding, because this process was beneficial for both parties and as soon as possible. Violetta looked gorgeous. Her soft blue dress amazingly emphasized the color of her eyes and feminine features. The girl did not expect Winter Blooming to be such a magnificent man. Violetta could not even think then that at first sight she would fall in love with the man who would become her husband. The happy girl admired Winter and really wanted him to have the same feelings for her as she did. Taking a moment, the girl approached her husband, took his hand, and said that when she met him, she immediately realized how lucky she was. When the music died down, Ash, Violet's older brother, said that everyone knows that Winter Blooming paid a huge sum as payment for this wedding. He took the opportunity to add that he apologizes for putting the royal family in danger. Ash said that to prove this, royal power would be abolished, and all powers would be transferred to Parliament. And in conclusion, Ash said that the Lawrence family renounces all titles. This marriage was the only hope of obtaining the title of Duke, and now all his hopes collapsed in 1 second. In front of everyone gathered, Winter Blooming was publicly humiliated in his attempts to gain power. Winter squeezed the wine glass so hard that it cracked and then shattered. He forcefully pulled his hand out of Violetta's palms and sharply headed towards the exit. One of the guests shouted to Ash that this was a great decision, but Violetta no longer heard it. Someone from the crowd added that the royal family was the first to give up privileges, and the example shown would be the beginning of a brighter future. Violetta headed to her room and suddenly heard screams from behind. These were guests and relatives from Winter. They caught up with her and began to accuse her of being the cause of everything, that her family looked down on the Bloomings. The guests began to grab her dress and demanded to return the money that Winter spent to pay off their debt. Violet was in a panic. She understood that her brother Ash's statement would be the beginning of a future tragedy. The maids ran after Violetta and begged the younger mistress to return to her bedroom. The girl managed to catch up with Winter before he was about to leave the house, and asked him to stay at least another day. Violetta told him that her mother was throwing a party today and asked Winter to go with her. Winter replied that this time he would return only in a week, and told her to go alone. He abruptly pulled his hand back and told her not to waste his time, then reminded her that he spent a lot of money to get the title of Duke. Winter added that she should choose one of 2 things: either return the money or give him the title. And if she can't do either, then she should at least be quiet and not disturb him. Violetta replied, because nothing will change if he stays just a day. No attempts helped Violetta hold Winter. He simply silently freed his hand and went about his business. 3 years have passed since that terrible ceremony, and sometimes Violetta wondered if this always busy man would have come to her funeral. After conducting an examination, Rickman, the family doctor of the Blooming family, said that he did not see any complications. Violetta replied that she was constantly tormented by headaches, to which the doctor advised her to stop pretending. The girl said that the pain is so severe that sometimes it is difficult to get out of bed. The doctor only replied that if she called him again, he would be forced to complain to the eldest madam. The maids hurried Violetta, saying that she needed to get ready. She replied that if the doctor said that she was healthy, then so be it. At that moment, a thought came into her head to change something. When Violetta went outside, one of the maids noticed that something was wrong with her hair. The second one answered her that she said about some changes and cut her hair. But it was for the best. The maids were annoyed by constantly combing her long hair. Violetta really didn't want to go to this party. She understood that there would be no place for her there. Everyone would ignore her. But she also couldn't help but go. On the threshold, she met Winter's mother, Duchess Kasorin, and his brother Diev. The Duchess said that she was worried that she was constantly sick. The family doctor noticed Violetta from afar and shouted that, since she came, she was definitely faking it. There were censures from everywhere, apparently. She didn't want to be at her husband's family's party so much that she pretended to be sick. Winter's mother said that she was a princess, so a small pain would seem big to her. In the midst of the fun, Violetta stood alone on the side and thought that this party would end quickly. Diev approached her and said that, apparently, his brother was away on business again if she was always alone. He said that the others were too strict towards her, constantly slandering and defaming her name. Diev took off his scarf and, tying it around Violetta's neck, added that it hurt him to see that no one would take care of her. He offered her a drink and added that he was ready to brighten up her loneliness. She needn't worry, no one would know. Violetta sharply pulled his hand back and replied that he should not worry. Diev came close to her and told her to behave smarter, and her brother was constantly absent. Violetta escaped from his hands and rushed away. Diev looked after her and quietly said that she would regret this. The girl ran across the yard and was in shock, the heir to the Blooming family, and her husband's brother was a libertine who had thought of molesting her. Violetta was lying on the bed. She was so tired and could no longer endure the eternal humiliation. Violetta said goodbye to her happy childhood. I said goodbye to a 3-year marriage that felt like hell. Violetta said goodbye to Winter. Violetta's hand, which had been reaching out to the sun, weakened and fell lifelessly onto the bed. A moment later, she woke up and realized that she did not feel heavy thoughts. The headache disappeared. She felt light and warm. Perhaps this was heaven. Violetta thought that if she had known that death was so sweet, she would have died 3 years ago. Winter began to wake up with the bright morning sun shining straight into his eyes. He wanted to call one of the servants, but suddenly felt that something was wrong with his voice. Winter looked frantically at his hands and did not recognize them. They were not his hands. He began to panic greatly and could not understand what had happened to him. It was at this moment that Violetta lay lifelessly in her bed, but suddenly her hand twitched imperceptibly. Violetta, in a great mood, went to the mirror and saw with horror that she had become Winter. Secretary Hale came into Winter's chambers with breakfast and said that Lowell Badalin had already arrived and he urgently needed to get dressed. Hale added that Winter had also overslept and they were running out of time. He put his clothes on the bed and asked Winter to put on a tie. After all, the meeting was official. Winter thanked Hale. The secretary was at first surprised by Winter's politeness, but then decided that he was trying to speak. According to etiquette, he reminded Winter that yesterday he had lost his temper. Winter grabbed his head and asked what happened yesterday. Hale began to say that they were discussing the supply of coffee beans, and Lowell was trying to raise the price. And then the secretary remembered the time and asked Winter to quickly change his clothes. Winter asked Hale to go out for a while. He was embarrassed to change clothes in front of him and then come and tie his tie. Kyle could not stand it and replied that Winter had not been himself since the morning, and he was starting to worry about him. When Winter got dressed, the secretary, tying his tie, advised him to return to his speech and, as usual, throw out his emotions through swearing. Winter headed for the exit, and Hale advised him that if Lowell got on his nerves again, so that Winter would not overturn the table. Violetta thought that in front of her, Winter had always been cold and reserved, but as it turned out, he could turn tables with others. She seemed to have gone crazy, because everything that was happening seemed to her to be just an illusion created by her sick imagination. Violetta entered the room and saw Lowell. Be that as it may, she could not ignore this contract, and tried to behave in much the same way as Winter behaves. She took the contract and began to study it carefully. Lowell showed his calculations and said that he would only sell coffee beans at this price, period. Violetta replied that they would not bear such expenses. Lowell laughed and said that this was a lie, because Winter had restored his hotels and they were thriving. Violetta thought that this was impossible. Otherwise, Winter would not have behaved like this with her. It seems that this is the fruit of her sick imagination. She always felt guilty before her husband, because he lost and experienced a lot. Therefore, every time Winter came home for a while, she tried to brighten up his return with a smile. Lowell said at the current price he couldn't even pay his children to do the work. Violetta asked in surprise whether his children really work and get nothing. Hearing this, Violet was ready to agree to Lowell's price and put her stamp on the contract. Hale stopped Winter and told Lowell that the president had had a little too much to drink yesterday and was not feeling well. The secretary whispered in Winter's ear, "Had the president not sobered up yet to do such things?" Violetta replied, "But the children of Lowell are suffering." Hale replied that it seemed that Winter was affected by this because he was forced to work as a servant as a child. He added that this stingy guy won't pay the children anything anyway and just wants to make money at Winter's expense. Violet wondered what Winter would have done if he hadn't been hung over. She remembered that last time he turned the table as soon as it came to raising the price. KL had to calm Winter down and reschedule the meeting. Violetta realized that now she needed to turn this heavy table over, just like Winter would have done. Violetta grabbed the edge of the table, at which point Lowell stumbled back and shouted, "Not this!" Then she realized that she couldn't do this. She would never do that. Violetta took the contract in her hands and invited Lowell to start negotiations all over again, but he did not understand why Winter had changed so suddenly. She said she intends to continue the dialogue until both sides reach a common agreement. Turning tables and intimidating the other person is Winter's method, but now Violet is here. She had to live for years under the yoke of people's criticism and ridicule. Now this is what she knows how to do best. Violetta must treat this as another test that she must withstand. She told Lowell that they would now read the terms of the contract from the beginning. They will work until they make a decision, or one of them gets tired. Hearing that a bell could be heard ringing from the younger mistress's room, the servants hurried to answer Violetta's call. One of the servants assumed that Violetta would again begin to complain of a headache and suggested that the second one pretend that they did not hear. Without waiting for the servants, Winter decided to leave the room himself and tripped over the empty wine bottles lying on the floor. Coming out onto the stairs, Winter saw their family doctor talking to someone in the hallway of the house. Having descended, Winter told Rickman that he had a headache and asked him to urgently examine him. The doctor took Violetta's pulse and stated that just yesterday he had said that she was fine. He let go of Violetta's hand and asked how long she was going to pretend. Winter grabbed the doctor by the chest and shouted that today he needed to enter into a contract with that stingy Lowell Beidlin. He told the doctor to stop being rude and do his job. Winter went to the safe and, opening it, asked Rickman if this was enough for him to stop acting so impudently. He threw a wad of money at the doctor and told him to repeat what he had to do. Dr. Rickman fell to the floor and muttered that he had to cure the younger mistress. Winter told him to move and to get her back on her feet. Anything would do, otherwise he, or rather her husband, would fire the doctor. Winter thought that he would fire him anyway as soon as he got his body back. Rickman was shocked how the younger gentleman could give his wife the password to the safe, and why she began to behave so arrogantly. One of the servants asked how he could help the younger mistress. Winter ordered him to bring him some hot coffee. Flip, Winter's personal servant, who brought her coffee, noticed that her taste preferences had become like Winter's. Winter finished his coffee and shouted for Dr. Rickman to urgently find her a cure for her headache. Personal servant Flip Winter ordered to urgently go to the station and buy a ticket for the nearest train. When everyone left, Winter grabbed his head, which was splitting from pain, and wondered what was wrong with this woman. He considered her a sophisticated princess, but in fact, her lifestyle was no different from his. Winter realized that there could be no mistake here, and he really swapped bodies with his wife Violetta. But for some reason this did not surprise Winter. It was better than being a slave in the land of the Lilliputians, or be stolen by some magician and subjected to his terrible experiments. Winter looked in the mirror. So much time had passed, and Violetta finally cut her hair. A year ago in the winter, a small conversation took place between Violetta and Winter. Before dinner, she said that she was glad that Winter would be home for 4 whole days, and they would spend several wonderful evenings. Winter, continuing to eat dinner, dryly replied that he did not see the slightest reason for joy. Violetta asked what her husband thought about her hair, whether it was too long. She added that maybe she could cut them shorter. Winter would like it. The husband answered Violetta that she could do as she wanted. He had nothing to do with it, and he didn't care. Winter then said that if she had nothing more to say, then he would go. He had a lot to do. That time, Violetta never cut her hair, and Winter decided that she had simply changed her mind. From that day on, all the questions that Winter didn't know how to answer so that she would be satisfied disappeared. A maid entered the room and brought medicine from the doctor, then added that the carriage would be ready in the evening so that Violetta could go to the station. Winter lay down and closed his eyes. The more he thought about Violetta, the less he understood her. Violetta woke up to the voice of Kale, who wished him good morning and was already carrying a cup of hot coffee. She wanted to get up, but the secretary suggested that Winter lie down because he did a great job and was inimitable yesterday. He recalled that Lowell gave up yesterday, then said that he was surprised that Winter learned cigar etiquette, since he constantly slept in class. Lowell apparently was also surprised that this rootless stranger knew how to smoke cigars correctly. Violetta remembered that yesterday she told Kale to bring 10 bottles of wine with good cigars, because there was a long conversation ahead. She smiled softly. Perhaps it was too much to torture Lowell for 47 hours. Hale replied how Winter could say that, because he managed to conclude such a lucrative contract. Violetta managed. She didn't even think that her knowledge of palace etiquette would be useful at such a moment, and she was ready to spend eternity in this state. While Violetta was drinking coffee, Hale said that a telegram had arrived from Mother Winter. He added that the younger madam cut her hair and suggested that her son compliment his wife. Hale said that everyone cared so much about Violetta, and he did not understand why she could not find a common language with the blooming family. He heard that Winter was not interested in this. Violetta recalled that her husband never went to parties with her, and at family gatherings he only talked about work, not paying attention to her. How could he know about the contemptuous glances, whispers, and accusations? She is sure, even if he knew, he would not have done anything. Violetta was to blame for his troubles and had long ago stopped hoping for anything. At this moment it was reported that the younger mistress wanted to see her husband. Hale was surprised why she was here. Screams were heard in the corridor. They tried to hold Violetta back, saying that they shouldn't barge in so unceremoniously. Winter, in Violetta's body, burst into the room and ordered everyone to leave. She and her husband needed to talk. Violetta in Winter's body was afraid that now this dream would end and everything would be as before. Violetta's servant Flip, who brought the younger mistress, approached Hale and said that she jumped out of the carriage and rushed off so quickly that her tone could not stop her. Winter closed the door and said that he was right. They really switched bodies. He sharply asked what she did to make it all happen. Violetta replied that she had nothing to do with it. Winter grabbed Violetta by the chin and asked what kind of bottles were lying around the room and why there was such a pungent smell of cigars. And the moment they touched each other, they suddenly returned back to their bodies. Winter sighed with relief. He would finally get down to his business and forget about his headache. Violetta thought that the dream was over and she would have to live as before and endure contemptuous looks. Winter asked again how this happened, referring to the contract that Violetta signed for him. He said that his wife managed to extract favorable terms for him, and as soon as she was able to persuade this stingy Lowell, Violetta understood that she could not hope for changes in their relationship, but it seemed to her that Winter's words sounded like a compliment. She told her husband that it was important to find the reason for what happened, and drew attention to the fact that this time Winter was listening to her carefully. Violetta added that Winter descended from the Conic family, who emigrated a long time ago to Luckround. They said that among them were gifted with magic. Winter answered, "Does she really think that if a person was born from a foreigner, then he is definitely a sorcerer, and his dirty blood is to blame for everything?" Violetta said that she didn't mean it at all. She just wanted to find a reason. Winter replied that it was not the first time he had heard the humiliation of noble gentlemen, what to expect from the arrogant royal family. For the umpteenth time, Violetta tried to take a step towards her husband, but he constantly just pushed her away. Winter thought maybe he had gone too far, and Violetta had tears in her eyes again. Suddenly, Winter grabbed Violetta in his arms and opened the door into the corridor in which the amazed servants and assistants stood. He carried her into the bedroom and said, whether he was a sorcerer or not, to throw it out of his head and better think about himself. He knew her condition, which he himself had experienced, and understood that she could barely stand on her feet. He placed her on the bed in his room, saying that she was the most comfortable in the house. Winter took off her shoes and told her to rest here while he was in the office, but Violet said she felt better today. He answered how she could call her condition the best. While he was in her body, he felt like he was dying. Her body was as heavy as a stone. How could she live in such a state? Winter sternly ordered Violetta to lie down. He would immediately make sure that the doctor examined her. Leaving the bedroom, Winter ordered to urgently find another doctor for his wife and choose comfortable clothes for his wife, to which Hale replied that the president, oddly enough, continues to display the image of a gentleman. The doctor came and carefully examined Violetta and said that she had obvious heart problems, then asked how long she had been taking medication. Violetta replied that she took the pills that their family doctor prescribed. The doctor doubted the doctor's qualifications, since these medications had not been used for a long time due to side effects such as headaches. As soon as the girl heard that her pain was curable, she immediately began to get out of bed. The doctor replied that in her condition it was better not to get up and lie in bed. But Violetta replied that she needed to go to her bedroom before the owner of the room arrived, which surprised the doctor that there was such a relationship between the spouses. The next day, Violetta's room was in a bustle from the very morning. The maids were running and fussing. Some offered her this or that dress. Others tried to help her choose gloves and style her hair. The head maid, Lulu, fussed and said that they would do everything to the highest standard and prepare her for dinner with her husband. The maids put one dress after another on her, and Violetta did not understand what it all meant. But most of all, she was at a loss when she heard about a joint dinner with Winter. Violetta herself wanted to choose an expensive and beautiful dress, but immediately thought about how the Duchess might react to this. Kasorin will definitely not ignore this, deciding that her son Winter is spending too much money on her. Violetta decided to choose a more modest dress, but the maid said that the color of the expensive dress would suit her very well. Noticing that the younger mistress was looking at it, and the girl still decided to wear this dress because it was her favorite color, and the style was very feminine. When Violetta started getting her hair done, she already understood that no one would contradict her or ignore her requests and interests. Lulu said that Winter is lucky. He is lucky to marry such a beautiful and kind mistress. Violetta replied that she was worried that Winter was spending so much money on her, and he was on the verge of bankruptcy because he paid off her family's debts, and today he bought her so many dresses. Lulu was surprised because Winter constantly buys dresses. This was a shock for Violetta. She had never seen them. The girl panicked. Then who owned all these dresses that he bought? Winter was nervous because Violetta was delayed and looked at his watch, and Hale asked him to wait a couple more minutes. Winter turned around and finally saw Violet. The girl came up to him and said that she was very glad to see Winter. Violetta usually dressed very modestly, but today she surprised her husband by choosing a beautiful and expensive dress. Winter said that perhaps she was hungry and offered to excuse her to the table. Winter caught a glimpse of one conversation among those present in the restaurant about the fact that an elevator was installed in his house. It was so convenient, especially if he was in poor health, and ordered Kale to urgently install an elevator in his house. Violetta felt embarrassed. She understood that all this trouble was because of her. Was her body really such a burden? At the table, Winter said that he had found out and was convinced that he was indeed from the Canic family. He found nothing in the records about witchcraft, but there is information about cases of body swapping, but it is not clear why this happens. Winter then said that while in his body, Violetta had signed a brilliant contract, and he wanted to express his gratitude to her. Violetta smiled and answered if instead of thanking her, she could ask for his consent to go together to his father's birthday. Winter replied that his time was more valuable than hers, and he wanted to express his gratitude with a valuable gift, asking what she wanted to receive. Although they were spouses, Violetta felt that they were like strangers, and said that she did not need gratitude. It was enough that everything ended well. Winter responded sharply that Violetta had again begun to irritate him with her behavior. Violetta said that she had long wanted to ask Winter one question. He replied that he was listening to her. She lowered her head and asked if Winter would have come to her funeral if she had died. He looked at his wife in fear, not understanding why she was having such terrible thoughts. Violetta added that it would be better to commit suicide than to continue living like this. Winter was furious. Even when he was beaten and humiliated, such thoughts never occurred to him. She doesn't even know what it means to work for days, be locked up, and go hungry. Winter was shocked that Violetta was now trying to threaten him with her death. The girl replied that she just wanted to know, then her husband could set aside one day of his life for this. At that moment, Hale was in a hurry to see Winter. He was in a hurry to show the president the estimate for installing the elevator. Winter abruptly snatched the papers from the secretary's hands and threw them, and, throwing them to the side, sharply headed towards the exit, leaving Violetta alone. Winter left without saying a word to Violetta, thereby causing her mixed feelings. The maids escorting the girl to the exit said that she must be tired and wanted to return to the estate. Violetta replied that they had not had an easy day either, and told Lulu to prepare the carriage. Suddenly, Ariella Lawrence, Violetta's cousin and famous actress, approached her. Ariella was glad to see her sister and asked why she was not visible in society. She needed to visit the capital more often. She then added that her husband Winter is a nice person. She often sees him at the Keisel Stadium and even found a common language. Violetta replied that she did not really like sports, which she was almost unfamiliar with, and in general she and her husband had different interests. Ariella said that her sister had not changed at all, and it was not surprising that Sir Winter was already tired of her. Hearing this, Violetta said, "How can Ariella say such a thing?" And she responded by saying that everyone notices this. If Violetta had been the same, she would have expressed everything to her face, but she understood that her words would be of no use. In their eyes, she is an insignificant princess who grew up in luxury and is unable to understand ordinary people. All of them would rather consider Violetta tiresome, perceiving her revelations as mere whims. In the carriage, Violetta asked Lulu if Ariella often stays at the Conic Hotel, and she replied that she did quite often and said that their hotels were the best. Suddenly, Lulu thought that these were the reason why the younger mistress did not know about the existence of the dresses. Winter was often not at home, but Violetta hoped to the last that he was not the kind of person who would cheat. She understood that her husband hated him, but until the last she hoped that he did not have another woman. Lulu poured tea for Violetta, saying that if she refused dinner, she could bring her dessert. She added that when you're full, life doesn't seem so hard if you're tired, and there's a haze before your eyes, then you just have to drink a cup of tea and everything will go away. Violetta took a sip and replied that it really helps. Tears appeared in her eyes. She then changed her mind and asked Lulu to cook her dinner to gain strength. Closing the door behind her, Lulu replied that she would soon bring dinner, which would be prepared by Turin, the cook who prepared a magnificent dinner in their restaurant. But for now, the younger lady could rest. Later, sitting down at the table, Violetta began to listen to Turin talk about his magnificent dish. Lulu interrupted him and began moving the dish she had prepared closer to the girl, chirping that she was also a good cook. Violetta found it amusing to watch how these two bickered with each other and each tried to get the girl to taste his dish. In order not to offend any of them, Violetta ate all the dishes they had prepared, then asked if her husband had returned. Lulu replied that she thought Winter would stay at their hotel in the capital, but he had recently returned home. Violet remembered Ariella telling her that her husband was tired of her and was determined to talk to Winter. She remembered her husband's reaction to her words about death and her funeral. At this time, Winter was in his office tearing and throwing papers from the table. He considered himself a pathetic coward for reacting to his wife's words in such a way. There was a knock on the door. Winter saw Violetta, who said that she wanted to talk to him. Violetta noticed Winter's dissatisfied look, but said that this could not continue and they needed to get a divorce. Winter remembered for a moment their wedding day, that graceful step and aristocratic manners. And this sophisticated princess was forced to marry him out of a sense of duty to the royal family. And he tried to buy a title only by his ability to make money. He had neither a title nor blood ties. The only thing Winter was capable of was to earn enough for his wife to bathe in luxury. It is his fault that with his indifference he brought Violetta to thoughts of death and divorce from him. For a second, Winter imagined what could happen to him if Violetta disappeared from his life. In response to her proposal for divorce, Winter said that they could divorce at any time. He agreed to this, but on one condition: that she would return him the money he spent to cover her family's debts. He then added that they had been married for 3 years, so he added interest as well. Winter came closer, took Violetta by the head, and said maybe he could add more for her idly lying on the bed. He looked into her eyes and added if she still wanted a divorce. Violetta replied that she understood that their marriage was causing him losses. Did he really not want to get rid of such a marriage? She said that she was ready to work off the debt even to death in order to repay the debt to him. Violetta added that she felt that Winter hated her, so why torture each other? Winter replied that she was mistaken about hatred and he was not going to divorce her. He added that if he does not want a divorce, then no one will help her with this. At this point, Winter told Violetta not to bring up this topic again. A few days later, Violetta and Winter were sitting in a train compartment that was heading to Blooming Lands. Violetta understood one thing. She could not divorce Winter as long as money was involved in this matter. She had not fully forgiven her brother Ash, who received money for her marriage and left her in trouble, but now he was the only one who could help her. A couple of days ago, she wrote a letter to her brother saying that she intended to get a divorce and asked to find a way to award Winter the title of Duke. Winter drank another glass and fidgeted because the seat was not very comfortable. Violetta told her husband that he was already drinking his 7th glass, to which Winter replied, "Is it really so difficult for a wife to tolerate her husband's unworthy behavior?" She replied that she was simply worried about his health because his father died early because he drank a lot. Coming off the train, Winter, noticing that Violetta had stopped, said that a carriage was waiting for them. Violetta pointed to the girl who was selling flowers and asked to buy them for her as a reward for a successfully concluded contract. Winter asked if she would like to ask for something worthwhile as a gift, to which Violet replied that she liked flowers. The husband said that he would buy her flowers elsewhere. Even in their garden, the flowers are much more beautiful. But Violetta replied that she wanted exactly these flowers that the child was selling. Winter, as always, was absent on his business, and Violetta constantly thought why he didn't give her a divorce, whether there was some kind of personal benefit for him that she didn't know about. It was her father's birthday, which Ash and Winter were supposed to attend, and Violet was going to talk to her husband again, after agreeing with Ash. At that moment, Violetta was informed that Mr. Ash had arrived. She ordered him to enter. Suddenly, she saw that Winter's mother, Duchess Kesserin, had come with Ash. She said that Ash had told her everything. The brother said that he was disappointed in his sister. He did not think that Violetta was so selfish. A year ago, Ash met with the Duchess and current Duke James Blooming to reveal that Sir Winter had assigned Violet a sum of money as a share of the estate and offered to take it. He said that Violetta doesn't even know about them and the money is lying idle. There shouldn't be any problems with its loss. Ash suggested dividing them into 3 and no one would know about it. Duchess Kesserin expressed concern that the bank might be interested in the loss, to which Ash replied that there was no need to worry about that. He reminded them of his situation, and it would not be difficult for him to cover his tracks. He had already taken care of everything. Ash offered them joint cooperation and waited for their decision. Entering Violetta's room, Ash asked how she could think about a divorce if he wants. He will make sure that she does not even dare to mention such a thing. The Duchess grabbed her head and said that she tried as best she could and was lenient, despite the fact that Violetta was feigning her illness. Violetta tried to object to the Duchess, convincing her that she had never lied to her. The Duchess screamed, calling her ungrateful, asking whether she was unhappy with Winter himself or his lack of a title. Kesserin continued to scream that it was her fault that she endured all this, but she did not intend to wish for it anymore. Violetta replied that the title had nothing to do with it. She wanted to get a divorce for another reason. Violetta no longer intended to endure humiliation. Duchess and Ash listened as the girl wailed that every party she had to listen to how she was a fraud. She added that Winter was deceived by her brother. She had nothing to do with it. Ash immediately interrupted her and asked the Duchess to correct his impudent sister, and he gives his consent to any measures. Kesserin looked at Violetta menacingly and said that she was punishing her for her own good, and she must understand this. She gestured to the maids, and they immediately grabbed the girl and dragged her by force. Violetta was immediately locked in the closet. She heard the Duchess say that she was hurt by her every action, and Violetta should think about her behavior. Violetta asked to open the door, and Kesserin told the maids to let her out by the beginning of the party, because she had to be there. The girl cried and begged to be let out, but everything became quiet, and she realized that everyone had left and left her alone. Violetta was in despair. She couldn't stand it anymore. No one cared about her fate. She wanted to die. Guests began to arrive at the party, and after some time, Violetta heard that someone had opened the lock on the door of the closet in which she was locked. The girl left the bedroom, went down into the living room, and saw Winter. He was sitting on the sofa surrounded by his partners. Heading to her husband, Violetta said from afar that she was glad to see him return. She hoped that he would come to greet her. Approaching Winter, Violetta asked him to urgently talk to her. The husband answered dryly that he was currently having a very important meeting with his partners. Winter discreetly asked Violetta to return to the bedroom and said that he would come soon. The girl took his hand and, pressing it to her, replied that it was urgent. If not now, then never again. Winter felt uncomfortable in front of his partners at that moment, and he again asked Violetta to return to her room. The disappointed girl began to slowly climb the stairs. She was offended that the conversation with Winter did not take place. Violetta felt defeated and humiliated, and then she turned to the wall where the weapons hung. It was late evening when Violetta reached the end of the blooming property. It was a villa by the sea. An elderly woman who was watching over the villa came out to her. She was surprised by the appearance of the younger lady, who came here for the first time. She offered to make Violetta a cup of hot tea to warm up. The girl refused, saying that she would not be long, and asked the woman to leave her alone. She looked at the sea and thought that by demanding a divorce from Winter, she at least hoped to get at least a drop of his attention. After the betrayal of her brother and the humiliation of being in the closet, Violetta still believed that Winter would be the only one who would support her. But this last hope also collapsed. All these were empty hopes. It was an empty place for everyone. After finishing the meeting, Winter remembered Violetta. He was alarmed that she would behave this way in front of everyone, without even knowing what her wife wanted to talk about. And suddenly he saw traces of fresh blood on his palms. Violetta left them at the moment when she pressed his hand to her. Winter burst into Violetta's bedroom to find out where she might have gotten hurt, but there was no one in the room. He asked the servant if she knew where his wife was. She replied that she did not know. Winter ran around all the rooms and the area adjacent to the house. Violetta was nowhere to be found. He asked Kale if there were carriages heading to the capital. He replied that there was no such thing and asked the president to calm down. Winter shouted how he could be calm when his wife disappeared because she hardly knew the area. At that moment, a maid ran up to him and, quietly saying that Violetta was locked in the closet by her brother and mother, immediately ran away. Returning to the hall, Winter met Ash, who warmly said that he was glad to see him. Winter, not paying attention to Ash's speeches, sharply asked if it was true that he and his mother locked his wife in the closet. Ash calmly replied that Winter may not know this, but among aristocrats, this is a common and easy punishment. Ash added that he knows about his sister's desire to divorce Winter and her behavior is crossing all boundaries. At that moment, something happened, and Violetta felt herself in Winter's body again. While in Winter's body, she sharply replied that this was a personal matter between him and Violetta. And if it happened again, he would not leave it like that. Ash felt that something was wrong with Winter. Knowing his character and attitude towards his wife, he should have simply ignored Violet's punishment. Violetta went out into the yard and went to the coachman. She knew that she was in the villa and told the coachman to take her to one place. Now she understood why she and her husband were switching bodies for the second time, and this was not just a coincidence. Once Violetta chooses death, bodies are exchanged, no matter which way she chooses. Winter came to his senses and could not understand how he ended up in a villa by the sea, on the very border of their domain. The elderly maid was already running to the younger mistress to find out what happened and where the shot came from. And then Winter saw a revolver lying on the sand. The elderly maid quickly picked it up and took it into the house, not understanding how this weapon ended up on the shore. Winter looked around and couldn't understand why Violetta came to this place alone at night. He didn't understand why he and his wife switched bodies again. He approached the horse, but told the maid to call her a carriage, saying that she was too tired to ride a horse, but in fact he simply did not know how to ride it. Entering the house and waiting for the carriage, Winter thought that Violetta had done this on purpose, and that she was also to blame for their exchange. Violetta stood in the middle of the hall and looked at the ticket she had bought, which she bought without thinking. And Winter's wallet was in her pocket, so it turns out she stole her husband's money. But she did not want to return to the estate after the death of her father and the dissolution of the royal court. Mother Ella Felix left the palace with Ash and went to the lands of the Felix family. Now she lived by caring for her son, and for sure, there would be shelter for her daughter. Being in Winter's body, Violetta was already standing near the train. She knew that her mother loved her just as much, as long as she did not become an obstacle for Ash. On the train next to Violetta, there was a girl who chirped all the way that she had run away from home. Her family reproached her for not knowing how to spend money correctly and not having the slightest idea how to earn it. Violetta smiled and said that she was a very brave girl, and then the girl asked if by chance her interlocutor was Sir Winter Blooming. Seeing the young man's reaction, she realized that she was not mistaken and warmly said that she was glad to meet you. The girl introduced herself, saying that she was the princess of the Principality of Doss. Her name was Sharon, and she was a childhood friend of Princess Violet Lawrence. Violetta opened her eyes in surprise. Was it really the same Sharon, her friend, and she remembered her? Violetta replied that his wife often told him about the time when they spent their childhood together and studied ballet together. For a moment, Violetta forgot that she was in Winter's body and joyfully communicated with her childhood friend. At the same time, the carriage stopped near a house by the sea. Hale ran out of it and shouted to the president. Winter was surprised at Hale's quick arrival, but even more surprised at how the secretary realized that he was Winter. Hale recalled that Winter had recently asked him to find out about the exchange of bodies in the Canick family, and besides, the president's actions seemed strange to him. Hale added that he was finally convinced of this when Winter rode off on a horse, not knowing how to ride, and the younger mistress called a carriage. Sitting in the carriage, Hale asked Winter what happened. He replied that, apparently, Violetta decided not to go to the party and ducked out. Winter ordered people to be urgently sent to search for Violetta and was calm only in the fact that in his body she should not be in any danger. Hale replied that it would be so, and added that Winter needed to do something when they returned to the estate. Entering the hall, Hale said that Winter should attend the party in place of his wife while they search for her. To avoid panic, Winter agreed to do this and began choosing an outfit. But he didn't like anything. He considered all Violetta's dresses dull and boring. And then an idea occurred to him, and he headed to his dressing room. Hale tried to stop him, thinking that it might anger the younger mistress. Hiding in the fitting room, Winter replied that he should be angry because she was now using his body as she pleased, so he would repay her in kind. A few minutes later, Winter was ready and, opening the curtains, walked out of his fitting room. A year ago, Hale brought Winter a report on his financial condition and said that the situation had stabilized, and he could breathe easy. Winter remembered that he never gave Violetta a wedding gift and ordered to buy her several expensive dresses and take them to her dressing room. But after some time, the president was informed that Violetta had returned the dresses, saying that she did not need them, leaving only one wood-colored one. In addition, Winter was brought a letter from his mother, which said that the dresses were luxurious, but Violetta's family was modest and advised her son to take better care of restoring his finances. After reading the letter, Winter ordered new dresses to be sent to his wife. Perhaps she just didn't like them. But everything happened again and the dresses were returned again. Winter decided to leave this idea for now and ordered all the returned dresses to be placed in his dressing room. When Winter came out of the dressing room, Hale saw that the president had put on almost all the jewelry he had given to his wife and said that it was too much, but Winter did not listen to him. Hale tried to convey to the president that a normal noblewoman would not dress like that. People would not like it. Winter grumbled, not understanding how this dress was put on. Hale offered his help. The president turned sharply and asked Hale if he was going to grope his wife and ordered to call the maids. Hale was embarrassed and called the maids, who immediately began to help Winter put on his wife's dress. A few minutes later, the president looked in the mirror. He was pleased with how he dressed his wife, noticing that expensive dresses suited her very well. One of the maids whispered to the second that the lady looked as beautiful as at the wedding, and she replied that there was no need to remind her of this event, because then there was a big scandal. Winter turned and asked why they were whispering behind her back and added that he could kick them out of the estate at any minute. One of the maids replied that when the president disappeared after the wedding ceremony, Violetta waited for him all night without taking off her wedding dress. Winter watched the maids try to apologize, but thought that he didn't know what they just said. Did no one really tell her then that he just urgently needed to leave on business? As the maids did his hair, Winter realized that the wounds inflicted that evening would never heal. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why Violetta asked for a divorce. At the party, John Blooming was annoyed that Violet was late for his birthday. The Duchess was worried that her daughter-in-law had told Winter everything about the punishment and that perhaps something had happened between them. And in the hall there were whispers between the guests. Someone discussed Violetta's health. Someone said that in 3 years they had not had a child. The Duchess, having heard this conversation, said that perhaps Violetta did not accept her husband because he was the son of a foreigner. The discussions continued. Violetta is no longer a princess, but she neglects her husband, and not showing up for her father-in-law's birthday is just impudence. Winter boldly opened the doors and entered the hall, posing as Violetta. He loudly apologized to the guests for his lateness, saying that it took him a long time to choose an outfit for his father-in-law's birthday. The Duchess and John walked towards her, and Kasorin said that the party was dedicated to her husband. Was she dressed too flashily? This was what Winter had planned. He replied that it was a special day and she dressed like that at her husband's request because he spoils her with gifts. These words did not arouse suspicion among the Duchess because Violetta did not have her own money, and she said that since this was Winter's request, she would not object. Winter noticed the impudent expression on his mother's face and rude manner and decided that as soon as he congratulated his father, he would immediately leave. After delivering his congratulatory speech, Winter turned around and walked away. The Duchess shouted that this was impolite. She did not even listen to her father-in-law's answer. The Duchess could not find an answer why Violetta began to behave so impudently. Perhaps her relationship with Winter had improved, and she was hiding something. Winter walked towards the exit and was proud that he managed to cope with the role of Violetta perfectly. Finally, the train heading to the capital of La Cronda arrived at the station, and Violetta and Sharon stepped out onto the platform. Sharon said it was amazing how much Winter knew about Violet, and she had a great time. Sharon added that she had heard rumors that Winter and Violet were not on good terms. The king was constantly busy with the problems of the country, and the mother was busy only with her sons. The girl added that Violetta was really looking forward to having her own family. Violetta remembered how, as a child, she and Sharon often played with dolls, and she always got the role of a girl, a child. She also got along well with Farron, Sharon's brother, and it was a good time. Sharon said that she was happy for Violet that she had met such a wonderful person as Winter and wanted everything to work out for them. At that moment, a station employee approached Sharon and said that the carriage that would take her to the hotel was at the exit from the station. Violetta asked Sharon if it was true that the Principality of Dawes gave new citizenship. The girl replied that it was so. They have few inhabitants, so the Principality gives citizenship to anyone who wants it. After that, Sharon waved to Winter and said that she had a lot of fun. Left alone, Violetta understood that, planning to get a divorce, she needed to think about the future. If she fails to get a divorce, she will simply flee to the Principality of Dawes, obtain citizenship there, and thereby be freed from suffering. Violetta was sure that Winter would not even look for her when he found out that she had disappeared. Violetta thought about finding a place where she could stay, but at that moment someone called out to him. She turned around and saw a policeman who asked for a strange request, for cooperation, and the Duchess could not find a place for herself. She tried to understand what had happened, because Winter never paid attention to his wife. 12 years have passed since Winter entered their family. They gave him attention exactly as much as the money he brought in. They gave him love for money, which he accepted unconditionally. It was a deal beneficial to everyone. The Duchess was worried that if he found a new home, became close to someone and wanted to leave them, they would lose this source of income. She looked at Violetta leaving and realized that his attention to her could persuade Winter to do this, so their divorce might not be such a bad idea. Winter asked Hale to find out if Violetta's friends and relatives were at the party and ordered him to greet them. Cale replied that he would not be able to recognize them because Violetta had not been to any tea party. Winter was very surprised by this and realized that he already knew 2 reasons why Violetta wanted a divorce. He told Cale to take a closer look at the guests and hoped that the right people would come up and talk to him. Winter looked at the guest standing nearby, and assuming that she might be from Violetta's side, he smiled sweetly at her. The guest did not answer. She just looked at Violetta with an arrogant look. Kael whispered to Winter that they didn't seem to know each other and suggested they go to others. But the president replied that something was wrong here, and now they simply ignored him. And the guest, to whom Winter smiled, went away to others and began to gossip that Violetta had no dignity, since she, not seeing her husband's attention, was already flirting with his secretary. Winter began to become convinced that everyone was deliberately ignoring his wife's presence. He remembered when Violetta asked him to go with her to his mother's party. He should have asked the reason then. While Winter was thinking about all this, One of the assistants approached Kale and whispered something quietly in his ear. The secretary approached the president and whispered to him something that concerned his wife Violetta. Hale tried to do everything to ensure that President Winter caught the last train heading to the capital. As he put his luggage away on the top rack, he had no idea how the younger madam ended up at the police station. Winter doubled over from a sudden attack of pain, his lower back falling off and his stomach throbbing strangely. Kale asked the servant to immediately get the medicine. The secretary handed the president the medicines that were found in Violetta's bag, and he asked what kind of drugs they were. Hale replied that it was just a painkiller, but Winter grabbed the jar and read it himself. It was a remedy for pain during menstruation. The president threw away the bottle of pills and grabbed his stomach. He could not stand this aching pain. Finally, he agreed to take the medicine and asked for a glass of water. Violetta was sitting in the capital's police station and finally heard footsteps. It was Winter. He approached Violetta and asked how long this would continue, now they had already met at the police station. Violetta did not expect that her husband would find her so quickly, and now she would no longer be able to do what she had planned. Winter said that not even half a day had passed, and his wife had already done something again since she was here. Violetta replied that upon arrival at the station, police approached her to check her documents. She understood that this was their job and, taking out her identification card, handed it to the police. When they saw Winter Blooming's name, they couldn't believe their eyes and immediately apologized for causing him inconvenience. She wanted to ask why they were apologizing, but the police quickly left. A boy in a cap approached Violetta and said that, judging by his gray eyes, he was a foreigner, then added that his father was also not from here and he was also subject to such checks. Silver hair and gray eyes are a sign of the Connick family, strangers, but Winter gained enough influence for the police to run away from him. Violetta added that she could not come to terms with the manifestation of discrimination and turn a blind eye to what was happening. Winter knew she was right, but he didn't expect her to be so intolerant of injustice. Violetta wanted to talk to the police, but they replied that they had a lot of work and needed to wait. She was again ignored. Disappointed, she stood up. Winter wanted to calm her down and lightly touched her shoulder. Just like last time, the same thing happened. Winter and Violetta returned to their bodies. The president said that Violetta needed to rest. Her body was in terrible condition. But Violetta insisted that she needed to talk to the police. She sharply opened the office doors and resolutely entered the office. The police were surprised to see Sir Winter and the younger mistress at the door. Violetta looked into the corner where the cage stood and saw people locked inside. Noticing this, the policeman said, "If the junior madam came to ask for strangers, then she has no idea what danger they could pose." Violetta replied, "Doesn't justice really mean treating everyone equally? They should know the concept of honor." Winter saw the policeman go to open the cage and promised that all charges against the detainees would be dropped. Violetta thanked them for their understanding and added that in the future she would expect them to take the right measures. When they returned to the estate, Winter put Violet to bed and told her that she needed to rest after the trip. He added that he knew about her pain before menstruation, and was she really going to go to the police station in such a state? Violetta replied that this was not the most difficult condition she had experienced in her life. Winter asked if his wife had friends in the South. Violetta asked why he was so interested in this. He explained that there was no one at the party who tried to talk to her. She went there so often, but never made any friends. In 3 years, Winter had never gone to events with Violetta, so the aristocrats had the impression that he hated her. Violet said that perhaps Winter had a lot to do and she would not keep him. Winter replied that if suddenly they switched bodies again, and a policeman accosted her, then he would allow his wife to kick him. Then Winter took Violetta by the chin and said that it was the first time he had seen such an expression on her face. Having come to his senses, Winter pulled back his hand and said that recently he had begun to get used to her body and therefore was paying attention to every little thing. Kale followed Winter and said that he had set up a meeting that was interrupted last time. He then added that after the meeting there would be a management meeting. Later he would explain the details of the party to the sponsors. But Winter thought about Violetta. He was worried that with the onset of menstruation her pain would intensify. It was difficult for her weak body. He told Kale that he needed to go check on Violet. The secretary was noticeably surprised because they had to hurry and a carriage was waiting for them. Winter quietly went into the bedroom and, seeing that Violetta had fallen asleep, sat down next to her on the edge of the bed. He stroked her head and told her not to get sick, not to think about divorce, and to live with him. At that moment, Winter thought that he had come in vain. He urgently needed to go to the meeting, but his legs did not obey him. When Violetta woke up, Lulu came into the bedroom and said that she was glad to serve her again. She saw that Violetta looked better today. The girl said that after breakfast, she would go to the lands of Felice and ask that a carriage be prepared for her. Violetta added that she would like to send a secret message to a friend who ran away from home. Lulu replied that her friend was not a timid person and would now entrust everything to the servant. After sending the message to Sharon, Violetta had already arrived in the Felice lands and was getting out of the carriage. Violetta's mother, Ella Felice, came out and said that she was glad to see her daughter Violetta and asked how she was doing. Violet apologized for not visiting her mother, to which she replied that her daughter was now part of the blooming family and understood her. She invited her mother to take a walk through their garden and at the same time talk about something and seek advice. Hale handed Winter an envelope and said that this was information about the next sponsor's party. This year the organizer will be Cantus, a monastery in the south-central part of La Gronda. Winter read the information and asked Hale if he received wine from them as a gift for donations. The president added that it had excellent taste, and he intended to supply it to the hotel he would soon build. Hale replied that it would be troublesome, but Winter himself knew that with his level of etiquette, it was useless to negotiate. And then the president thought about his wife Violetta, who knew how to exchange bodies. She knew court etiquette and negotiation tactics, so why not offer her to switch bodies on the appointed day? From a conversation with Violetta, Ella realized that she and her husband Winter did not get along very well. Violetta added that her husband does not even tell her when he will return, and the aristocrats in the South hate her. Mother said that everything was fine with them, but Violetta replied that she simply did not tell her about her difficulties. Violetta told her mother that she wanted to divorce Winter and asked her for help. Ella took her daughter by the shoulders and anxiously replied that under no circumstances should she do this. Mother added that troubles happen in any family and divorce is not a solution or a solution to problems. The next moment, Ella said very important words. You can't blame another person when solving problems depends only on you. After a short silence, Mother said that her position was much better than Ash's because he, having renounced the throne, lost everything. Violetta understood her mother perfectly after the death of her older brother. She became even more obsessed with caring for her second son. She said that she knew everything perfectly well, but sometimes she just wanted to be her poor daughter. Returning home and receiving no support from her mother, Violetta saw Lulu, who said that a response had arrived from her friend Sharon. Lulu read to Violetta that her friend Sharon was staying at the Flower Garden Ogle estate in the south of the capital. Violetta decided to visit her friend at all costs and went to the capital. Sharon ran out to meet her and shouted joyfully how long it had been since they had seen each other, and she was so happy to see her childhood friend. Sharon was followed by Enna Tisha Ogle, Sharon's maternal grandmother and owner of the Ogle Flower Garden. Violetta asked her to communicate with her formally, to which Enna replied that Violetta could call her grandmother as before. As they sat down to drink tea in the greenhouse, Sharon constantly praised Violet, saying that she was good at flowers, even wild ones. At that moment, the servant ran in and said that something bad had happened. They had brought flowers for tomorrow's dinner party, but they withered during transportation. Sharon panicked about what to decorate with now. The flowers had wilted, and the roses in the garden had already fallen off at this time of year. Violetta decided to intervene and proposed her own idea, changing the theme of the event and decorating with other plants. She said that Moluccella blooms very richly in their garden and they could be used as decoration. They would add freshness to the room. Bouquets can be tied with green ribbons, and at dinner you can serve white wine, the transparency of which will create a feeling of lightness and coolness. Serve green grapes and olives with wine, then guests could enjoy the atmosphere of a summer night. Sharon happily exclaimed that her idea was brilliant and asked Violet to help with the decorations and organization of the party. And the grandmother added that if Sir Winter tolerates his wife's absence for a day, then Violetta can stay with them until tomorrow. The grandmother said that she was ready to pay Violetta if she helped and saved the current situation. Violetta replied that she would be willing to help. She always wanted to try to earn money with her own work. The girl turned to Flip, Sharon's brother, and asked him to tell her husband that she would be staying in the flower garden today. Violetta thought to herself whether it was necessary to inform him about this at all. She had to wait for Winter, but he did not send her any news, and this was the case for 3 years. She told Flip that she had changed her mind, because Winter would not be coming home either, so there was no need to notify him of her absence. Violetta wanted Winter to experience the same feeling as she did: painful anticipation and uncertainty. Hale told Winter that he remembered when the president bought the island after the wedding, but the situation with money was not very good. No one thought that Winter would get out. They came on business to the main Hotel Conic, which was located near the mouth of the Rikla River. Hale added that the Conic hotel chain has now become the largest on the continent. Winter walked up to the carriage to return to his wife, and Hale offered to spend the night in the office because he worked hard and needed to rest properly. The president got into the carriage. When he worked, he could go days without sleeping or eating. For 3 years, he worked like hell. Winter intended to invite Violetta to dinner tomorrow. He knew that his wife did not leave her room until breakfast and wanted to take a look at her before going to bed. Returning, Winter met Lulu in the corridor, who reported that the younger mistress had not returned. She assumed that Violetta was having a wonderful time with her friend, since she did not return yesterday. Winter was surprised that Violetta spent the night away from home and, moreover, did not warn him that she would be delayed. The president knocked on Violetta's bedroom door, but there was no answer, and Lulu repeated that the younger mistress had not returned. Winter turned around and sharply replied that his wife did not like places where there were a lot of people. He would never believe that she went to have fun, and even did not spend the night at home. He scolded the assistants and servants. Were they really not alarmed by her absence and the fact that he had no news of Violetta? Lulu tried to justify herself, because the younger mistress went to the flower garden and nothing should happen to her there. The maid told Winter that he himself rarely appears at home, and now he is causing a commotion because his wife decided to unwind by leaving for the day. If Lulu had not been Violetta's favorite maid, she would have already been thrown out of the door, however. In some ways, she was right. Having calmed down a little, Winter ordered to report to him as soon as Violetta returned. Left alone, the president remembered his wife's words that she was ready to commit suicide rather than continue to live like this. If she hadn't started talking about death then, he wouldn't have lost his temper out of the blue. To drive away bad thoughts, Winter decided to work, but still continued to think that his wife was late. It was only morning, and Winter began to look through papers and bills. At noon, the president drank only a cup of coffee and was again distracted by work. It was already getting dark. Winter was already looking through the papers for the umpteenth time and couldn't find a place for himself. Finally, he could not stand this torment, threw away the documents, and shouted for a carriage to be prepared for him. Sharon lay down, tired from the preparations, and the grandmother told Violet that she knew from her granddaughter that Sir Winter knew his wife surprisingly well. Violet smiled discreetly, because Sharon had met her, not Winter. Grandma asked if Violetta had a hard time living in the South. Violetta replied that it was not easy, but it was much more difficult for her husband, who spent a lot of money on her. Making another bouquet, the girl added that if she complains, then, as her brother says, she will become selfish. She just has to endure and cope on her own. Grandma replied that she was sorry to say such things about her brother, but Ash was a real opportunist. She advised Violetta not to attach importance to everything he said and not to take his words to heart. Violetta had nothing to fear anymore, but it was scary to imagine that there were people like him, ready to do anything for their goal. The grandmother stood up, hugged the girl, and said that if things get hard, she can always come to them. It was noon the next day, and this meant that the dinner party in the Ogle Flower Garden would soon begin. Arriving guests were delighted with the floral design. There was a feeling of lightness and pleasant freshness. One of the guests came up to express her admiration, and the grandmother replied that it was all thanks to the youngest mistress of the blooming family. Then the second guest came up and asked if Violetta was really from the same blooming duchy, and then added that she had a very developed sense of aesthetics. Next came Kenzie's former commander of the Royal Guard and now chief of police. He kissed Violetta's hand. She learned that after the dissolution of the royal court he became a policeman, and he replied that he regretted that he could not protect her as before. Kenzie's added that he was aware that she had recently visited the police station and promised that he would take care of everything. Violetta had already forgotten that feeling when she chatted and laughed so carefree with other people. It seemed so far away. She really wanted to forget about her worries for a while and be wrapped in warmth and attention. But the second day passed, and Violetta was not at home, and Sir Winter left her on the wedding day and returned only a few months later. Suddenly, she heard Winter's voice, who apologized for arriving without an invitation. He approached Anastasia Ogle and presented her with a box of wine as a gift. Violetta approached her husband and asked what Winter was doing in this place. Winter didn't know what to come up with and replied that he was traveling for work and decided to drop by here. Violetta said that there were people here who were very dear to her. She had not seen them for a long time and asked permission to stay here a little longer. Winter replied that he did not mind, and Violetta, surprised by this answer, invited him to greet everyone together. This was the first party in 3 years where Violetta and Winter appeared together as husband and wife. They returned to the estate, and Winter noticed that Violetta was slightly drunk, although the wine was not so strong. While they went to greet the guests, she completely drained the glass. Apparently, she really liked the wine. Violetta smiled when her husband said that she even got drunk decently. She replied that she had always dreamed of saying at a party, "Meet, this is my husband." Violetta added that she was very nervous that Winter would soon be leaving on her own business. Winter leaned her head against him and suggested that she sleep and not worry about him. Violetta said that she wanted to talk to her husband. Winter replied that if she was talking about a divorce, then he had already answered that this would not happen. The girl took Winter's hand and said it was time to talk about their child. She would like to save the marriage but move away from her relatives and have a child. Winter abruptly released his hand and replied that he did not want a child. Violetta said, "Is this really all his reaction, and he won't even explain the reason for the refusal?" Winter became gloomy and did not answer Violetta. Violetta said that a child is a guarantee of saving a marriage. Winter replied that he knew this very well, but could not give the opportunity for this child to be born. The next morning, they had breakfast in silence. Violetta wanted to ask what Winter wanted from her. She understood that it was not without reason that he came to her room in the morning and then offered to have breakfast together. Finally, Winter asked if Violetta wanted to talk today, believing that she had a lot to tell him. Violetta replied that they had already discussed everything and there was no need for these belated conversations. Winter began to get irritated and said that he was ready to listen to her, and his wife began to be sarcastic. He asked his wife what the secret was to exchanging bodies, to which Violetta replied that she would not tell. She needed to have her own weapon. Violetta asked a counter-question why Winter didn't want to have a child. Winter replied that they would talk about it when she stopped insisting on a divorce. Violetta said that she felt like something that was bought at an expensive price, but was not suitable for use. It's like a product bought by mistake, lying around in the attic as unnecessary. But it's a pity to throw it away because of the money spent. She is useless. But Winter doesn't want to let her go, so what's the point in her life? Winter said that he was not going to leave Violetta. He had no such thoughts. He added that thanks to the body swap, he knows how she feels and will try to find a solution. Until today, money is the only way to solve problems, and this has been the case all his life. Violetta asked if he really solves everything only with the help of money, and he has so much of it for this. Winter answered who he would be if he didn't have money and didn't solve problems with it. He led Violetta to the window and offered to look at the open spaces that he owned. Winter said she was acting this way because he demanded money from her during a divorce conversation. He added whether she really thought that this amount meant something to him, since he had so much money. If she thought her divorce proposal would make him happy, then she doesn't know him well. Winter said he would try to understand her and asked Violet to do the same. He then added that if Violetta had not planned anything, then in 2 days he would ask her out on a date. 2 days later, Violetta's whole room was filled with flowers, and she asked Lulu if it was all too much. Lulu looked at the younger mistress and replied that perhaps Sir Winter had gone too far with the gifts, but she looked very pleased. The maid asked where they would go on their date today. Violetta replied that she had no familiar places, and they would go where Winter was. The girl told Lulu that she would have breakfast in this room and asked her to bring breakfast here. Lulu, making the bed, said that Mr. Turin had bought excellent butter. It's a pity that Sir Winter doesn't eat it. Violetta replied that she did not know that her husband did not like butter, but preferred vegetable oils. Lulu added that his childhood was not easy, so he was not used to haute cuisine, which is why he liked vegetables more than meat. Violetta was once again convinced that she knew nothing about her husband, just like he knew about her. When Violet and Winter arrived at what her husband called their date, she was a little confused by what she saw. Seeing the naked torsos of tanned and stocky men, Violetta now knew what queso competitions looked like. Winter was in a good mood. He told his wife that he would not be jealous because she was looking at other people's men. He handed Violetta a bottle of alcohol, offered her a drink, and said that here you can drink straight from the bottle. Violetta, taking the bottle and trying to relax, realized that so far everything was not so bad. She looked at Winter. She liked that today he was not dressed as pretentiously as usual. His casual style suited him very well. At that moment, Ariella Lawrence approached them and, surprised that Winter was with his wife, asked what they were doing here together. Winter replied that he and Violetta had a date here. Ariella laughed. How can real spouses act so coldly towards each other? She added that considering how cold Violetta is, this is not surprising. She has been so ideal since childhood that it is not interesting to be with her. Suddenly, Winter grabbed Violetta and sat her on his lap, hugging her tenderly. Winter answered Ariella that watching his wife was much more interesting than watching the competitions taking place. Ariella made a displeased face and immediately walked away. Winter breathed out a sigh of relief. He was pretty tired of Ariella's pestering, and he couldn't be rude to her since she was Violetta's cousin. Violetta calmed down that her husband is not close to Ariella. She is trying to flirt with her husband. The cousin was jealous of Violetta since childhood and always wanted the same thing as her sister. In the end, Ariella could have what Violet couldn't: freedom and glory. Violetta asked Winter to let her go. It seemed to her that this was no longer decent. Winter asked how many times he would hear the word indecent from his wife, and Violetta replied that not one. Then Winter invited her to argue. He said if she wins, he will spend time with her at 3 parties, whatever she says. Violetta replied that if Winter won, she had nothing to bet on. Winter offered her a body swap for one day. Her help would be very helpful. Violetta looked at her husband in disbelief. Did he really need her now? She thought that in any case, nothing was keeping her alive, and it didn't matter if the exchange worked or if she actually died. Violetta replied that she agreed to help her husband even without a bet and asked when they should exchange bodies. Winter said that a bet is a bet and offered to bet on a kiss. He added that there would be one condition in the kiss. It would last until he was satisfied. Violetta thought that in order to win the argument, she just needs to be more attentive and careful. She will be in the black anyway, and she agreed. At that moment, it was announced at the stadium that the competition was beginning. The wrestlers ran into the arena and a real massacre began. Violetta was in real shock. She did not expect the competition to be so aggressive. For her, the behavior of the fans, who were not shy in their expressions and behaved rudely, also seemed wild. Violetta pulled herself together. If she controls herself, she will not lose. At that moment, the boy who accepted the bets ran up to them and, greeting Winter, was surprised that Princess Violetta was present. Winter said that if the boy recognized her, he should immediately kneel down, and the boy did so. Violetta jumped up and, approaching the guy, said that there was no need for such honors. The royal court had long been abolished, and her husband was joking. Winter took the board and began to write down the name of who he thought should win. He explained to his wife that it was the same as at a horse race. Only you bet not on the horse, but on the fighter. Winter invited Violetta to place a bet, but she replied that these were people, and she could not do it. Her husband suggested that she imagined that these were horses. She needed to choose the most thoroughbred that could win the race. Violetta was seriously angry. How could Winter suggest such a thing? It's not decent. The next moment, she covered her mouth with her palms and, seeing Winter's satisfied face, realized that she had lost. The husband said that he did not think that their argument would end so quickly. He was even a little sorry. Violetta replied that her husband expressed himself rudely, and he replied that he deliberately provoked Violetta so that she would lose. Winter told her not to be angry and make a bet, as is customary in fights. Violetta looked at the wrestlers and pointed to one of them. Winter replied that it was Centaur Tan. The wife made an excellent choice. After 20 minutes of the fight, the judge announced that the victory was awarded to Centaur. Winter said that Violet won this argument. Violetta felt that if you get used to it, excitement appears, like junk food that whets your appetite even more. Winter got up and headed somewhere. Perhaps he saw some acquaintances. He stood nearby and chatted affably with some young couple. Violetta saw Winter smile for the first time. She thought that if she died, Winter would become freer. He called her over to meet his friends, and she thought about how it would benefit him that she continued to live. When they returned to the hotel, they were brought some crumpets that Violetta had never seen before, but they tasted excellent. Winter said that these are cheap baked goods from the night market, because today they are making and trying things that they have not done before. Violetta liked them so much that she even smacked her lips with pleasure. Winter smiled and said that she looked very cute now. Violetta was chewing a bun and didn't know how to react to her husband's words, because for the first time he called her cute. Winter reminded his wife of the promised kiss and added that now they were alone for this very reason. He warned Violetta that this would not be the childish kiss she thought about. Winter said that Violetta had a specific upbringing. She is modest, sleeps in clothes, is not used to being touched, and does not make unnecessary sounds. Violet looked at Winter and asked if this kiss was not just a touch of lips. When Winter sat Violetta down on the table, she tried to say that it was indecent, but her husband replied that it was okay during a kiss. Winter said that he wanted this for all 3 years and endured it, and Violetta wanted to know what kind of kiss it was and why she was so worried. Behind the door stood Lulu, who wanted to straighten the younger mistress's bed, and Hale, who was hurrying Winter to work. Violetta felt ashamed because she heard voices outside the door and asked Winter to stop. Winter held Violetta close to him and said that he had worked as a servant for a long time and would be able to handle the bed, and it would be made by tomorrow. Violetta tried to say that Winter should be ashamed of such words. Finally, the doors to the room opened, and the girl apologized for not opening it right away. Judging by the expressions on the faces of Lulu and Hale, they guessed everything. Winter displeasedly told Cale that as soon as he decided to rest, he immediately appeared. And Lulu asked Violetta in surprise what happened to her hair. As he was leaving, Winter said that if Violetta was going to a party, she should tell him and they would go there together, but only twice. Violetta answered because she lost the argument, and her husband said that he decided to show generosity to her. She looked after her husband leaving and thought, "I wish I could argue like this more often." Lulu, entering the room, was surprised that it was hot there, although no one lit the fireplace. Having done all the necessary things, Lulu wished Violetta good night and left. Violetta lay there and remembered how the day had passed. Winter's behavior seemed strange to her, but she was not disgusted by it. 4 days later, Violetta and Winter were returning to the estate. Everyone liked Violetta so much that they didn't want to let her go. They wished her health and advised her to eat well. Winter noticed her behavior and said that she seemed to like the hotel employees. Looking at the servants, Winter said he could take them to the estate and compensate for the cost of moving as a salary. Violetta flatly refused. She didn't want the servants to see what she was like there on the estate. But she answered her husband that it was not necessary, there was no need for it. Violetta did not want to return to the estate and suggested to Winter that they live in the capital because his work is also located there. She added that she was ready to change places with him as much as he needed. Violetta could already imagine how angry Winter would be and deny her request. But, much to her surprise, Winter calmly replied that they would do so. He agreed with Violetta that it was not advisable to travel such a distance to work. Winter said it would be difficult to move immediately because the Blooming family has lived on the property for generations. Violetta replied that, in any case, she was glad that Winter agreed. The president said that it is still difficult for him to understand her emotions because she behaves so restrained, even when she is happy. Violetta remembered the people who were very dear to her and dreamed of returning to the capital again. At this point, a train employee announced that they were forced to stop for a short time due to problems with the railway track. Violetta and Winter heard that the stop could last 2 hours at Long Riad Station. They got out of the car and a large valley opened up in front of them, flooded with the rays of the setting sun. Violet told Winter that she always wanted to thank him for giving this valley to her. She added that her brother Ash told her about it on their wedding day. Winter replied that he could not allow his wife to starve. Violetta smiled. She was glad that lately she and Winter could communicate so freely and he didn't get irritated like before. Winter suggested finishing the walk as their train was ready for further travel. Violetta was grateful to Winter for such a gift, but in the event of their separation, she wanted to return these lands to him as untouched. She knew that Winter was a person with a strong sense of responsibility to her family, but she caught herself thinking that she still loved him, even when he was away from home for a long time. A few days later, Winter told his parents that he planned to move out in the near future. The Duchess and Duke were stunned by this message and asked why so suddenly and what the reason was. Winter replied that it was too far from the estate to the capital for work, and he and his wife intended to move to the capital. The Duchess asked if this was Violetta's proposal, to which Winter replied that it was just hard for him. The Duchess said that they rarely see each other anyway, and she is afraid that if he moves, he will not return. The son promised his parents that he would come as soon as they called. They should not worry about it. The mother decided to press for pity and asked if she and her father had really done something wrong to him. She began to sob and say that apparently he could not accept them as family. Winter replied that he did not say that and they were always kind to him. The Duchess asked them to think about it and not do this. They were not even mentally prepared to part with their son. Winter said that he heard them, but for now he will create a temporary residence in the capital so that he can travel there, because his wife cannot live in hotels like he does. The mother sarcastically said why her daughter-in-law doesn't like that expensive hotel built by Winter, that she might not be happy with it. Winter repeated that Violetta would not move from hotel to hotel. You cannot call a place where you don't belong anything home. The Duke decided to defuse the situation and said, in any case, a temporary residence is not so bad. Winter replied that we can assume that he received their consent and asked permission to leave. He had a lot of work. When her son left, the Duchess began to frantically think about what they should do now, because they would lose part of the wealth that their son brought them. Winter was only 5 years old when his mother abandoned him, leaving him in a small restaurant. There, he began to be subjected to violence. Winter was forced to work hard and was beaten for any offense. Winter endured this for 7 whole years, and when he turned 12, he was determined to escape. One evening, he overheard a conversation between 2 restaurant patrons who were discussing that the Badalan aristocrats had begun purchasing coffee beans. Even then, Winter thought that perhaps selling coffee beans could bring some income. He soon escaped through the mountains of Badalan, scraped together all the meager funds he had accumulated, and bought his first cartload of coffee beans. After all the difficulties he had endured, Winter, risking his health, arrived at the blooming residence where his own father lived. While he was getting to the estate, the price of the goods soared tenfold, and the blooming couple realized that Winter had a talent for commerce. At a time when they could no longer survive on status, the couple needed a family member who could support them. John and Catherine warmly welcomed Winter into their family. Young Winter was fascinated by the ordinary life he experienced for the first time in the family. Winter became smart, cold, and ambitious, and most importantly, he was a bastard who did not need to bequeath the family. The Duchess was nervous. She did not want to lose such a reliable source of income because of Violetta. She was indignant at when Winter began to listen to his wife. What if she said to stop giving them money, as Winter would do? John also wondered how this happened, because until recently, Winter was completely indifferent to Violet. And then Catherine said that Violetta still doesn't know that she won't be able to have a child with Winter. Winter was a half-breed who inherited silver hair and gray eyes from his mother. Only one with the blood of the Connick family could give birth to him. John replied that he also saw that in the 3 years of their married life, the child had not appeared, which means that perhaps it was true. The Duchess said that Winter himself would not admit this to his wife, so as not to destroy their marriage and family. John replied that they could use this after learning about the deception. Even Violetta would not sit idly by and would definitely insist on a divorce. Winter sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the sleeping Violetta, who fell asleep immediately upon arrival. He could not understand how she lived with such a weak body. At that moment, Cale quietly approached and said that he had opened Violetta's dressing room. As soon as they returned, Violetta changed into one of her dull dresses, and Winter decided to personally find out what her taste was and proceeded to his wife's dressing room. He couldn't understand why she bought such dresses, even witches from the West dress more expensively. Perhaps she needs to buy more land, although she is unlikely to touch it. Cale replied that something was wrong here, because from leasing these lands, you can get a lot of money and not deny yourself anything. Winter suggested that Violetta was renting out the land too cheaply. Otherwise, it would be impossible to earn money just for these dresses. The president ordered Cale to find out everything at what price the land was being rented out. He did not rule out such an incident as the fact that the intermediary takes most of the funds handed over and only pennies reach Violetta. Having paid the office employee a considerable amount, Hale looked through the documents and listened that this was not shown even to the owner's relatives. He asked why in the papers the lands were divided into 504,500 acres. The employee replied that perhaps members of the royal family used to divide private property this way. Hale said that the royal family had long since collapsed, and the documents were in a terrible state. And then Hale saw that there was a mistake in the owner's name. There was a different name there. He asked the employee why the rent for 4,500 acres was transferred to another person, and who Carlson Lowe was listed in the papers. And then Hale remembered that Carlson Lowe was a singer who was known in circles as a womanizer. But what could connect him with the younger mistress? Having found out everything he needed, Cale went out and asked the employee to keep everything secret. Hale hastened to report to the president that the bulk of the income goes to the main handsome man of La Cronda and the scandalous singer Carlson Lowe. The maid woke Violetta and said that today she was invited to dinner with the owner and madam, who asked her to arrive before lunch. Violetta tried to get up, but her body was heavy, her head hurt badly, and she felt weak. But she had to get up and get dressed, otherwise Winter's parents would think that she was faking again. At that moment, Flip, Winter's personal servant, came in and said that he was ready to give her a foot massage. A few minutes later, Winter entered the room and wanted to say that it had been so long and Violetta was still in bed. Then he saw Flip massaging his wife's legs and asked what was going on. Flip apologized that last time he couldn't cope properly, which caused Violetta's bewilderment. Winter told Flip to leave immediately. He remembered when he was in Violetta's body. He himself asked Flip about this. He sat down near his wife's feet and said that he would finish giving her a massage. Winter added aromatic oils to the water and added that he had his own method. And then Violetta screamed in pain. Winter said why she didn't say it right away, but endured it, to which Violetta replied that she saw how her husband was trying. Winter tried to massage as gently as possible so as not to hurt Violetta. A few minutes later, Winter said that he was finished and began to put the slippers on Violetta's feet himself. Violetta's gaze betrayed her aristocracy, and this dazzling sophistication constantly reminds Winter that they are of different origins. He wondered if that was why he wanted Violet to fall into his arms, live in the kingdom he created, and be next to him. It was an incomprehensible feeling, more than hatred. Winter told Violet that yesterday he and his parents discussed the move, and it seemed like they both weren't happy about it. The girl decided that this was precisely why they invited her to dinner. Winter told his parents that he would arrange a temporary residence for Violetta. In the future, he would buy an estate there and take his wife with him. Violetta replied that she could easily live in a hotel, but Winter replied that it would be easier to throw parties in her own house. Violetta realized that Winter was doing all this for her sake, and quietly snuggling, she thanked him. Winter did not understand her and asked why she did this. Violetta replied that she wanted to show how happy she was, but if he didn't like it, she wouldn't do it. He gently hugged her and told her everything was okay. Violetta replied that they needed to hurry, otherwise they would be late for dinner with their parents, because he was a gentleman and the eldest son of the blooming family. Winter replied that she did not know how aristocrats behave towards him. Violetta can't imagine how they react when he introduces himself to them as the eldest son of the clan. They looked at him like he was a rat who belonged in the slums. Violetta replied that she learned about his attitude when they changed bodies, and this is not disdain. They are afraid of him. Violetta added that they are trying to put pressure on him with status, but he does not need to be arrogant, because he is already an aristocrat himself, whom everyone fears. She said that there was no need to think about these nonsense, and Winter felt her warm and gentle palm on his cheek. He pulled himself together and said that soon they would need to exchange bodies, and he would need her manners of etiquette and behavior. Winter added that there will be a sponsor party at the Cantus Monastery in September, and he wants to monopolize their wine for sale, but he needs to act arrogantly. Violetta replied that she would help him as a thank you for moving, and Winter said that the princess had a sense of humor. The girl no longer felt Winter's hatred, and besides, he listened to her request to move. But would he feel her sadness? The more hope crept into her heart, the more intense was the feeling of fear of death, but she promised her husband. Violetta was afraid that if Winter understood her feelings, she would no longer be able to exchange bodies with him. At dinner, the Duchess said that she would very much like Winter and Violetta to live with them a little longer, because she is not asking for much. She sadly added that they would no longer be able to get together and have dinner together. Her husband John asked her not to get upset ahead of time because they were still close to them. Violetta realized that her husband's parents were stronger against the move than she thought and was afraid that Winter might change her mind. The Duchess turned to Violetta and asked how her health was, because she had been missing parties due to poor health. She added that she was worried that the move would have a bad effect on her condition. But Violetta replied that she was already much better. Winter interrupted their conversation and said that Violetta was still ill and had difficulty coming down for lunch. He added that their family doctor Rickman was a charlatan and gave Violetta medications of poor quality. Winter was sure that the doctor was embezzling money that was allocated for the purchase of drugs and said that he would definitely throw him in prison. The Duchess exclaimed that she did not know this and told Violetta that she must have suffered so much. Mother added that if she needs something, Violetta can always turn to them because they are one family. Winter's father, who had been silent until then, asked Violetta why she wanted to move out of their house. The son wanted to answer that it was his idea, but John said that Winter should not cover for his wife. The father added that he, as a father, and having known Winter since he was 12, understands perfectly well that he was not the first to talk about moving. John continued to press Violetta and asked if perhaps she thought the capital was more suitable for raising a child. Winter stood up abruptly and said if dinner was over they would go, and told Violet to follow him. Violetta tried to say that they had not finished the conversation yet, but Winter sharply replied that he had already said that there would be no child, and there was nothing more to talk about. The Duchess and her husband quietly glanced at each other, and John asked what it meant that there would be no child. Violet responded that Winter told her he didn't want to have children. The Duchess said that Violetta must convince her husband, but she herself knew very well that Winter was stubborn and suggested that Violetta calm her husband down. When Winter and Violet left the dining room, the Duchess said that she did not think they had become so close. John replied that it was obvious to the naked eye that Winter had begun to care about his wife Violet. In addition, they constantly began to appear everywhere together, like real husband and wife. The Duchess said that now they know for sure that Violetta does not know that she cannot have a child with Winter. John took a bottle from his inner pocket and said that he had prepared the necessary medicine for Violet. The Duchess called the servant and ordered to immediately invite Violetta's new attending physician. Winter stood in front of his parents' front doors and eagerly waited for Violetta, who promised to come out soon. At that moment, Hale approached him and said that he had found out something about the private property of the younger mistress. Hale wanted to tell the president what he had learned, but then Violetta came out. Violetta persistently asked to tell the reason why Winter refuses to have a child. The husband replied that she did not need to know the reason and that they should go home. Violetta said that she would not leave him alone and would still ask him to tell him everything. She understood that Winter was very stubborn. Maybe she should be content with his answer. Winter asked why Violetta did not manage her land, which he gave her. He added that she doesn't buy jewelry for herself, and her dresses are the cheapest and most inconspicuous. Maybe the money goes somewhere else. Violetta calmly replied that she was not doing anything like that. Winter believed her. He offered to buy her something, but Violetta replied that she did not need anything. She said there was something she would definitely like to try. Violetta walked up to Winter and, taking his hand, said that this was exactly what she wanted now. Winter was surprised and answered, "Is this really all she would like?" But suddenly Winter pulled his hand away and said that holding hands was not serious. Apparently, they really had nothing in common. The next moment, Winter himself took Violetta by the hand and said that he had done what she wanted, and said that now they would buy her something that she would like. He pulled her along and said that they were returning to the estate, and Violetta replied that she thought that shopping was when you go to a busy street. Winter replied that he didn't have time to walk the streets. He could just call a busy street here. Violetta remembered that when she stood in front of her future husband on her wedding day, she was very worried and did not know what she should do. The only thing that came to her mind then was to take Winter's hand. Later, she always regretted that she had let go of his hand. Winter put Violetta into the carriage, but then Cale came up and briefly reported on what he had learned. The president said that he knew Carlson Lowe, but did not understand why he received part of the rent instead of his wife. Winter suggested that the property was divided because of taxes, but it was unclear why another recipient would be needed. When the president said that Hale could go, he was surprised that Winter really didn't want to sort this out. Winter replied, "Perhaps there is nothing wrong if another man uses her money, but if there is an affair between them, then Hale can deal with Carlson Lowe." The president said if Violet doesn't love Lowe, then it's okay and he can forgive her as long as they are together. Although he pushed his wife away, citing work, Violetta is not the kind of woman who is capable of cheating. But Winter wasn't entirely sure of this. So many people with nice faces do bad things. Violet screamed as Winter squeezed her hand tightly, and he apologized. And at that moment, the girl thought that finally their relationship began to improve. Winter decided that he would not suspect his wife of something that he did not know for sure. Beautiful dresses and various jewelry flashed in front of Violetta one after another, and the workers vying with each other offered to choose one or another outfit. Violetta said that she now understood what it meant to invite the street here, and her husband replied that it would be indecent to buy just one dress from them. A lot of time had already passed, but Violetta could not decide on a choice in her thoughts. She tried to decide whether this decoration would suit that dress, or whether the color was too bright. Winter watched Violetta and finally said that they were buying everything they delivered to this estate. After some time, the whole room was littered with boxes, and Violetta sat on the bed and watched as the enthusiastic servants sorted them out. She lay down and thought that Winter had been paying her a lot of attention lately, giving her expensive gifts, and she caught herself thinking that she didn't want to divorce him. At that moment, one of the servants approached her and asked where to put this purchased item. The girl's name was Jen, who said that she would now serve the younger mistress. Violet remembered how Winter had once told her that he was going to change half the staff at the estate. She told Jen that she was doing a good job and added that she wanted to join her and sort out the gifts she had bought. The new servants whispered that the younger mistress was not as they said about her. She even remembered their names right away. At that moment, Winter entered the room and, finding Violetta unpacking the boxes, pretended not to notice it. He said that he needed to go to the Hafit region for work, and it would take about half a month. Violetta asked in surprise why he was telling her this, because he never informed her about his departures and arrivals. Winter did not answer anything, only added that it was unlikely that all this would fit into her wardrobe, and suggested throwing away everything old. He boldly walked over to her closet and opened it to begin collecting old clothes. Suddenly he noticed scratch marks on the inside of the doors that had a bloody tint. Winter shuddered and remembered how he was locked in a closet as a child, and he scrubbed his fingers and nails until they bled. He remembered that party at which Violetta left blood on his palms and then suddenly disappeared. Winter turned to his wife and asked if Violetta had been locked in this closet. Violetta had to tell the truth that she was really locked in this closet. Winter thought maybe the teacher did it for disciplinary purposes, but his wife had always been a diligent student. Violetta said that there was no point in talking about it, and her husband might be late because he was in a hurry to go to work. But Winter sharply replied that she should not avoid answering and would immediately tell who did it to her. The girl said that, apparently, Ash did not like the fact that she wanted a divorce, and he asked his mother to convince her. Winter replied that this was nonsense, his mother would never do such a thing. But Violetta replied that she was angry that Violetta allowed herself to talk about divorce. Winter asked why his wife didn't tell him about this, to which Violetta replied that she tried to do so. She reminded her husband that she had approached him during an important meeting and asked him several times to talk to her. Winter remembered that evening, apparently. Then he thought that his wife had come to occupy his time with meaningless conversations about divorce. When they first got married, Violetta always smiled and offered to talk, and then she got angry at her husband's refusal. Violetta apologized for what she decided to do that evening and steal his body, but she didn't know what to do. Then Cale entered the room and told the president that it was time for them to leave. Winter turned around abruptly and ordered Cale to leave. Cale left, and Violetta said that Winter was angry with her again, as always. Winter looked at his wife in surprise and said, "Has he really looked furious with Violetta all these 3 years?" The girl approached him and, looking into his eyes, seriously replied that he did not seem like that, he was like that. Violetta headed to the bed to lie down. She reminded Winter that Hale and Work were waiting for him outside the door. And suddenly Winter followed Violetta, lay down next to his wife on her bed and closed his eyes. Surprised, Violetta said that this was her bedroom, and Winter replied, "What a shame, couldn't he just lie down?" After a couple of minutes, Winter became quiet, and Violetta thought that her husband had fallen asleep and turned to look at him. Much to her surprise, Winter lay there looking at her silently. Violetta turned away, and Winter said that he would leave as soon as she fell asleep. He added that if she wanted him to leave, she should quickly fall asleep and covered her with a blanket. Violetta closed her eyes. She thought that a person who knew nothing but work suddenly began to behave like this. She thought that no matter how much she got to know Winter, she still did not fully understand him. Winter went out into the corridor to tell Cale that he would be late and returned back to Violetta's room. A few days later, Winter arrived at a party hosted by his mother, Duchess Kasorin. The Duchess said that she was glad to see him here, but what brought him here and whether this visit would affect his work, because he was so busy. Winter looked seriously at Mother and asked if it was true that she locked Violetta in the closet. Kasorin realized that she could not avoid answering and said that this was done only for his sake. She added that it was very painful for her to watch her son being hurt by the news of the divorce. Winter replied that Violetta is not a small child to receive such punishments, and this is too much. The Duchess said she was sorry. If it had offended Violet so much, she would go and apologize to her immediately. Mother made a face of remorse and added that she just wanted to help them both not do anything stupid. Winter said that this time he forgives her, but this should not happen again in the future. The Duchess promised that she would not do this again and would definitely apologize to Violetta. Winter said it goes without saying, but he won't give them any more money for parties this year. Mother looked at Winter and asked if Violetta really advised him to do this to them. Winter replied that Violetta knew nothing about their conversation and that it was entirely his decision. Winter said that he had work waiting for him and headed towards the exit. The Duchess tried to come to an agreement with her son, explaining that without parties, she would not be able to influence society. But Winter no longer listened to her. 2 weeks later, Violetta arrived at the book club, which was located in a silk store on Rian Street. The hostess introduced the guests to Violetta, who was attending the book club meeting for the first time. Although the hostess showed her good nature, she could not understand why such an important person as Sir Winter's wife would attend such a petty event. She told Violetta that she was a little ashamed of her little shop and offered her a more comfortable chair. The princess replied that she did not deserve such honors, she just wanted to thank her for inviting her to the party. The hostess thought that Violetta was much nicer than she had thought about her at first. Before attending the book club, Violetta was nervous. She really wanted to make friends. But everyone treated her warmly and welcomingly, even regretting that she visited them for a short time. These half-months without Winter flew by unnoticed for Violetta. Thanks to her husband, his mother no longer threw parties, and Violetta spent this time in peace and quiet. But, for some reason, from time to time, disturbing thoughts visited her. Walking past one of the shop windows on a shopping street, Violetta saw a very beautiful watch and thought that it would suit Winter very well, but she did not have enough money. But despite this, Violetta still decided to go into the watch store, where she was politely greeted by a young salesman. Violet replied that she would like to buy a gift for her husband, Sir Winter Blooming. She asked to see the watch that was on display, but the store owner, hearing her husband's name, said that she could take it for free. But Violetta replied that she could not take the goods without paying and handed over the brooch, saying that she did not need it. The seller took the jewelry and, looking at the stone, said that it was a very old but very sophisticated brooch. He added that if she took the watch, she would still have some money left and she could buy something else. Violetta chose a scarf that was not very expensive but very beautiful. She told Flip to use the remaining money to buy food for her servants. Violet took the beautifully packaged box and wondered if Winter would like this gift. The maid Jen was very excited and said that the sweets bought in the city were very tasty and all the servants liked them. Jen handed Violet a spoon and, saying that this was a new medicine prescribed by the doctor, asked the younger mistress to drink it. Opening her mouth, Violetta thought that later she should also thank him for taking due care of her health. When Violetta drank the medicine, Jen said that Sir Winter had returned, but immediately went to rest. Violetta put her hand on the watch box and thought. Apparently, her husband was very tired, and realized that there was no point in bothering him now. She told the maid that she would meet her husband tomorrow and added that Jen could be free for today. Violetta thought that Winter probably had a better watch, and he was unlikely to look at it. She bought it without hesitation. She settled comfortably in bed and thought that tomorrow she would decide whether to give them to her husband or not. In the morning, Violetta decided to give her husband a gift, and opening the door to his room, saw Kale there. Seeing Violetta, Winter asked what she was doing here so early, to which she replied that she just wanted to know how he went on a business trip. The president ordered Hale to leave immediately and leave him and his wife alone. Winter pushed back the chair and, inviting her to sit down, said that he himself was going to go up to her. Violet stood holding the box from behind when Winter said he had good news for his wife. The family doctor Beryl was invited to the estate. A maid approached him and said that she had come to pick up medicine for the younger mistress. The doctor asked if she was giving Violetta the right pills before bed, as he advised. The servant took a new bottle of medicine and replied that she strictly followed his instructions. She added that she felt sorry for the lady, wanting a child in such poor health. If the maid had not mixed up anything, then the doctor thought it was strange, because the Duchess and Duke Blooming had told him exactly the opposite. He remembered when the two arrived, the Duchess handed the doctor some pills and asked them to prescribe them for Violetta as a catalyst for a safe pregnancy. The Duchess asked the doctor to keep secret the fact that their son and daughter-in-law did not want to have children yet, and generously rewarded him for his silence. The doctor, with a sharp movement, snatched the pills from the hands of the servant. Beryl wondered if he should confess everything before anything happened to Violetta. Either way, can he get away with what he did? The doctor handed the pill back to the frightened servant, saying that he just wanted to make sure he was giving the right medicine. The doctor decided that if something happened, he did not know anything about the drug, he simply followed the instructions of the Dukes of Blooming. Winter informed Violetta that he had already chosen the estate, and Hale was now in the process of purchasing it. He added that the estate was on a hill, and she would probably like this place. Violetta joyfully replied that they could spend the next spring there, watching the spring sun rise. Winter replied that Violetta could plant a lot of flowers there to make their estate more comfortable. Violetta, seeing that her husband was in a great mood, realized that she had done the right thing by coming. She plucked up courage and said that she had recently seen a wristwatch in one of the stores. Winter interrupted her and said if she liked them, he could buy them. Violetta quickly took the watch out of the box and, putting it on her husband's hand, said that when choosing it, she hoped that it would suit him very well. Winter looked at his watch, and his only reaction was that he told his wife not to do this again. It does not fit the rules of aristocrats. He added that what he earns is enough and there is no need to pay him or anything like that. Winter said he trained himself not to want anything so as not to be disappointed later. He remembered when, on the wedding day, Hale reminded Winter about the rules of knightly etiquette, how to behave with ladies, and now he bears the title of Sir. Winter answered him that after the engagement he had been a Sir for a month now, but no one addressed him like that. Knowing the attitude of the aristocrats towards him, it was hard to believe that Princess Violetta, like the sky, recognized him, a stranger. Winter remembered how Violetta approached him for the first time, and there was not a drop of arrogance in her behavior. When she extended her hand to him, he remembered the rule of etiquette and had to pretend to kiss her. Violetta brought him back to reality and said that his rule of what is accepted by aristocrats and what is not is ridiculous. With her words, Violetta questioned Winter's rules. He told her that he could not believe that the princess bought a watch like a simple, ordinary person. Winter said he liked the watch and would wear it without taking it off. He began to see Violetta as a simple girl who did not need to prove her existence with money. In the evening, Violetta reminded Winter that they were supposed to spend the night together for 2 days, but this did not happen because of his business trip. Winter replied, "If the princess doesn't mind, they can do it today." He looked into Violetta's eyes and thought how sweet and unpretentious she was. Winter added that this day was appointed by birth, to which Violetta replied, "Is this really the only reason?" She added that she knows that Winter does not want a child or a shared room. Winter replied that it was true about the child, but what made her think that he didn't want a shared room? He added that if it weren't for this rule of sharing a room, he would spend time with her until she herself wanted to throw him out of the door. Violetta listened as Winter said that he was ready to deviate from the rule of sharing a room, but it would not happen so quickly and he was ready to sleep with her. Winter asked if he could kiss his wife now, Violetta agreed, but would like it to be like last time. Winter laid Violetta on the bed and kissed her tenderly on the lips. He began to slowly pull the strings on her robe, taking them with his teeth. Violetta was very surprised and asked why he was doing this with his mouth, because he could untie it with his hands. She wondered why smart people become dumber in bed. Later, Winter took a hot shower, but his thoughts were on Violet. When he returned to the room, he saw that Violetta had already fallen asleep. He quietly approached his wife, gently stroked her cheek, and then carefully covered her with a blanket. There was a quiet knock on the room. It was Cale, who asked why Winter had called him. The president, taking a sip of hot coffee, said that he was thinking about the child. At the moment, they only know about the mixing of blood in La Cronda. He told Cale to go to the Alika area, where the Conic tribe lived, and begin an investigation. Perhaps he would find out more complete information on this issue. Winter thought that if somehow they had a child, he could avoid divorce. If this does happen, then Violetta will no longer have a reason to leave. Then, Winter heard that Violetta had woken up, and he hurried to give the cup to Cale to return to his wife. Violetta said good morning to her husband and added that she did not feel bad at all. Winter said that since she was up, they could look at the costume prepared for the trip to the monastery, because the party would be this week. Entering the dressing room, Violetta carefully examined the suit and picked up the invitation. She said that the invitation said that you must come dressed according to basic standards, so you need to replace your tie with a white bow tie. Winter replied that he did not have a white bow tie and needed to buy one. He asked if a blue scarf would go with the suit. Violetta replied that in this case, the color preferred by the Blooming family would be suitable. Winter replied that unfortunately he did not know the color that his kind preferred. He had not had a chance to learn it. Violetta opened the box and showed a scarf, which she purchased in the same store where she bought the watch. Violetta added that the Lawrence people preferred the color dark gray and suggested using it. She added that just as she became part of the Blooming family, Winter became part of their family, so this scarf would be appropriate. Putting the handkerchief in her pocket, Winter said that he was definitely lucky with the body swap. At this point, Violetta asked if she and her husband could switch bodies a day earlier. She explained that his mother was holding a tea party and asked Winter to go there instead. The husband agreed, but in return asked to receive the maximum benefit from the monastery. Violetta was delighted and replied that she would be ready to switch bodies on Saturday morning. And then the day came when it was supposed to happen again. During this time, the distance between Violetta and Winter decreased. They tried to understand each other. Violetta stood in front of the bottle of poison and was overcome by fear. What if this time she would die for real? But the fear receded when she thought about what she was doing for Winter. Violetta wondered again whether Winter would come to her funeral if she actually died. Already sitting in the carriage, Hale said that they should finish their work and then head to their mother's party. Violetta caught herself thinking that she couldn't get used to Winter's body. She was alive again. She looked at her hand and saw that her husband was wearing the watch she had given him. Hale already knew about their exchange of bodies today and told the younger mistress that usually the president quickly gets bored with things, but he wears this watch without taking it off. Winter, arriving at the party and getting out of the carriage, immediately heard whispers around that the younger mistress had again arrived at the party without her husband. And as before, no one paid attention to Violetta or communicated with her. Winter thought it was okay because that's what he came here for. He caught a glimpse of a conversation that a new building was being built at the beginning of Ryan Street, but its purpose was still unknown. Winter boldly approached the guests and said that she had heard that it was being built by a theater organization. The guests turned to her in surprise and asked how the youngest mistress knew about this. Winter replied that her husband shared it with her because they sometimes discuss his affairs together. He needed to move little by little towards the goal of exchanging bodies, and he asked if they wanted to learn something interesting. Winter could tell them that Violetta would definitely make friends. Then one of the guests asked if it was true that Sir Winter had recently invited all the merchants to his house. Winter replied that she needed clothes, and her husband invited only the best that were in the capital. The man asked about the party in the capital. Was it really true that Violetta was there with Sir Winter? Winter replied that this was also true, but he could not understand what was wrong with these people. And one of the guests exclaimed, which means that the rumors that Sir Winter had forgiven his wife were confirmed. Then Winter saw that one of the guests stumbled and broke a glass of wine. The interlocutor explained to Winter that now this lady had become a scapegoat and an object of contempt for the guests because she mocked Violetta the most. And now this girl is treated the same way they once treated the younger mistress. Winter decided to leave this unpleasant company and heard the guests apologize for their behavior earlier, saying that they had no choice, because Sir Winter's influence was very strong. Now Winter realized that it was he who was to blame for the fact that his wife was bullied in society without recognizing her. And if Violetta had not dressed so modestly, she would have received condemnation from society, which considered her an outcast. If not for this exchange of bodies, he would never have been able to find out about it. Winter approached the place where the carriages with guests were arriving and was worried that Violetta was delayed. He couldn't wait to see and ask Violetta what she was experiencing and enduring all this time. At that moment, his brother approached Winter and asked what the younger mistress was doing here, to which Winter replied that he was waiting for her husband. Dave grinned and asked if someone who had never attended a party with his wife would really come. He leaned over and quietly said that Violetta looked like she was desperate from loneliness and added that she could rely on him. Diev began to hug Violetta, saying that only he could help and protect her. If only she agreed. Winter sharply pulled his brother back and ordered him to immediately remove his hands. But Diev continued to smile unpleasantly and insist on his own. Winter said that Diev became completely insolent and called him a bastard. And at that moment Violetta appeared. She stood between Winter and his brother, sharply saying that enough was enough. Dave pulled back in surprise and asked why Winter suddenly appeared here, because he had never attended a party with his wife. Violetta stood silently opposite Diev and glared at him with a menacing look. Winter's brother had no choice but to simply leave them and hide in the estate. Winter turned to Violet and asked how long his taking had been bothering her. Violetta replied that Diev has been behaving this way since the very first party she appeared in their house. Winter, seeing his wife's condition, wanted to reassure her, saying that he would sort it out, and extended his hand to Violetta. But Violetta managed to dodge, reminding Winter that if he touched her, they would switch bodies back, and she still needed to visit the monastery. But Winter pulled Violetta close and said that there was something more important than a wine deal. He added that if a wife enjoys introducing her husband to other people, she can do so today. Violetta, not understanding anything, asked if something really happened here while she was away. Winter silently looked at his wife, and Violetta understood what had happened. Violetta hugged Winter and thanked her husband for coming today. When Violetta and her husband entered the hall, the lady who had been talking with the younger mistress a few minutes earlier exclaimed whether Sir Winter had really decided to attend their party. Winter, who was in Violetta's body at the time, replied that his wife told him that there was someone here whom she did not like at all. The guests began to speak quietly and only glanced briefly at Winter and his wife. Violetta always wanted to attend parties with her husband, but she never thought that with him she would feel like behind a stone wall. Winter quietly advised his wife to behave calmly and slowly walk between the guests. And then suddenly it started to rain, and all the guests were worried that the party might end. The hostess of the party began to calm the guests and invited everyone to go into the house to take shelter from the rain. Winter understood that Violetta would not be able to run in heels and began to take off his jacket. He quickly covered his wife and, holding her close, said that Cale would soon bring an umbrella from the carriage. Standing in the rain and clinging to Winter, Violetta felt his heart beating anxiously. She continued to waste away in this marriage and was not afraid to die, but the sound of her husband's heart instilled life in the girl. Winter said that he understood that Violetta did not like standing like that, but asked him to wait a little. The girl replied that this was not the case at all. She just really wanted to move to the capital as quickly as possible. Winter replied that he understood his wife perfectly, having been in her body, and felt what Violetta felt. The princess pressed herself closer to Winter and quietly said that most of all she wanted to live just with him. And then she insisted that Winter was wrong about the fact that it was uncomfortable for her to stand like that with her husband in the rain. The next moment, Winter saw that Hale was already running towards them, having opened his umbrella in advance. The husband covered Violetta with an umbrella, and she thought that she was about to cry from her husband's warm embrace. Violetta wanted to say something, but Winter kissed her passionately, thinking that no one would see them under the umbrella. At that moment, they both understood that in order to begin to understand each other, they did not necessarily have to change bodies. Finally, the rain stopped and the bright sun came out. The following Sunday morning, the ceremony of the sponsors' party began, organized by the Cantus Monastery in the south-central part of La Craunda. The abbot of the monastery thanked everyone present and said that the meal was modest, but their wine was excellent. Winter took a sip and told Violetta that the wine was truly excellent and he must buy it. Violetta also drank a little wine, but suddenly felt a slight but unpleasant nausea. In order not to scare her husband, she told Winter that it might be because of the new medications the doctor prescribed her. Violetta touched her stomach to see if what she thought had happened. But this cannot be. Only a week has passed since that night, and it was too early to tell for pregnancy symptoms. She suggested that most likely this was the effect of exchanging bodies on her body. Violetta, just in case, did not drink the wine and put it on the table. Winter noticed this and asked what was the matter. Violetta tried to remain calm and told her husband that she could not drink red wine and invited Winter to drink her glass. She watched as her husband took her glass and wondered if what she had been waiting for had really happened. Violetta decided not to show it at the party, and upon her return she was sure to be examined by a doctor. She was having a casual conversation with some of the guests who, apparently, were related to the theater. Discussing one of the productions, Violetta said that the decoration perfectly conveyed the mood of the main character. The guest replied that she was amazed at how educated and well-read Violetta was, and her husband added that he would like to invite him and Winter to their theater for the premiere. Winter stood silently nearby. He could not catch the train of thoughts and did not understand what they were talking about and what they were discussing. Violetta noticed her husband's lack of understanding and quietly whispered to him, "In order to understand small talk, you need to read hundreds of books and watch at least 15 staged plays." At this moment, special cards began to be distributed among the guests, on which they had to enter the amount of their donation for the monastery. Winter told Violetta that they needed to enter just enough so that the monks would happily offer the wine themselves. Winter was just about to enter the amount when he noticed a smiling man approaching them and joyfully calling out to Violetta. It was Carlson Lowe, an opera singer, and he greeted Violetta, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time. Violetta introduced Carlson, the second son of the Lowe family, to her husband and asked Winter if he really didn't recognize him. Of course, Winter recognized him and asked what kind of relationship Carlson had with his wife Violetta. The singer replied that he and Violetta had been friends since childhood, although for some time there had been talk about marriage. But that was already in the past. Winter shook Carlson's hand so hard that he screamed in pain. Carlson whispered to Violetta, "If her husband is so jealous, then why spend more time outside the home?" With these words, Carlson decided to leave, adding that he would leave them until new misunderstandings arose. As they headed toward the vineyards, Violet said that she and Carlson had been close as children, and their parents had actually considered marriage. But that was the end of it. Winter remembered Carlson's face and answered whether they really wanted to marry her to this womanizer, and a drunkard at that. Violetta looked at her husband in surprise and asked how he knew this, because Carlson is not as bad as they think he is.